For our next tech stage session, we have Cassidy Stearns, consulting team lead at DOS42, presenting on unleashing the power of a semantic layer. Cassidy, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, much appreciated. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session, Unleashing the Power of the Semantic Layer. Today, we're going to be talking about the semantic layer, as you probably could have guessed, 4 of its key benefits, and then we also will jump into a real-world example of those benefits in action. This discussion will be particularly helpful if you are just starting your journey with the semantic layer and AtScale, or also if you're just curious to hear some ideas of how you can unleash its power across your entire organization. So first things first, just a little bit about myself. My name is Cassidy Stearns, and I am a consulting team lead at DOS42, where I have worked across various industries with various sizes, from startups to Fortune 500 companies, with the main goal to help each of them leverage their data to make impactful decisions. Few little fun facts about me as well. I am born and raised in Colorado, but actually have recently relocated to LA, which I'm actually really loving. So hello to all of my LA neighbors out there. And I also have a passion for studying languages. All right, and so to kick things off, before we actually jump into the semantic layer itself, I'd also like to give a little bit of background about DOS42 and how we fit into the data landscape. And to do so, I'd actually like to first set the stage with an example. And now, whether you fall on the business side of the house or the technology side, I'm sure almost everyone here has experienced, at least once in their career, a time when a business user comes to a developer or a data engineer with a very specific request, either to maybe add in some logic that might help them for reporting or to help support analysis that their team is doing. But then the engineer goes, they do their magic, and then when they give that to the business user then realizes that that new logic actually does not help answer the question that they initially were actually trying to solve. And we are seeing this all the time, right? Business users make requests for data that they aren't fully familiar with. And on the flip side, engineers build out logic without the full context of the business. That is really where DOS42 comes in. We are a boutique data and analytics consulting firm that specializes in bridging that gap between business and technology. So we speak the language of business, but we are also data experts. We use modern cloud-based approaches and leverage the best data collection tools and platforms to help everyone in our client organizations make better decisions faster. And so now that we've laid the foundation, we are now going to shift and drill down into the semantic layer itself. And again, I think a lot of what we've talked about already so far is very applicable to the semantic layer and the benefits that it also brings to your data pipeline, because really what we're trying to achieve, and really also what most businesses are striving for these days, is to build a trusted agile pipeline that can serve all aspects of the business, right? From the ad hoc self-service reporting all the way through to data science. And so again, the semantic layer, I'm sure at this point, very familiar to most of you, if not all, but there are a few key points that I wanted to hit on before we dive deeper into those key benefits. And so really, the semantic layer is just an abstraction of your data, right? It's that independent business layer sitting on top of your tech stack. And that tech stack usually is quite messy, pretty complex, needs a lot of that engineering analytics knowledge to actually be able to use it. And so the semantic layer is providing that simplified view of your data. And it really acts as an entry point for your users across your business, right? So you don't need to know all of those inner workings of the stack, what's going on below that semantic layer. All you have to focus on is using that data to help you within your role. So that's really opening up the gates to your entire business, cultivating data literacy, and also providing that centralized single source of truth. So now that we've touched upon what the semantic layer is, we are now going to jump into 4 of its key benefits. And then after that, we will go ahead and see those key benefits in action. So the first key benefit that we're going to talk about today is going to be usability and understandability. And we've already touched on this, and so these themes will probably come up the rest of the presentation. But really what that semantic layer is doing, right, that business layer sitting on top of your stack is doing, is opening up your data to even more users. So again, those users don't have to have an understanding of what's going on. And that means so many more users within your organization can actually use the data, right? They don't need to be reliant on those data experts. And which also then means it's a much more agile way as well of development and using your data, since you don't need to go all the way upstream, right? You don't need to go to your engineers, request to have those upstream changes. You can actually work on building out additional logic yourself, or also just exploring the data. And again, all of this is just reducing that time it takes to actually use your data and make those actionable insights. The second key benefit is security and governance. And this is something that we see come up time and time again with our clients, right? It's a pretty key factor within your data pipeline. And the semantic layer provides both of these features. So on the security side, you can use that semantic layer to help delegate who sees what and when, right? Even down to the row level. So you're not having your users look at data that they really should not be looking at. On the governance side as well, this again helps centralizes your logic and your definitions. You know, we often see, there was one time I think an organization I was working with had maybe 6 or 7 definitions of revenue floating around. Didn't really know which one was the most accurate. You know, have to really track down a lot of teams to try and figure out, okay, but which definition of revenue is the one we should be using? And that just really spurs a lot of confusion and also a distrust in the data overall. But again, with that semantic layer, you can really focus on centralizing that logic, having that for your business, and get rid of that confusion within your organization. The third benefit here is going to be capability. And I really like to think of this as capability and enablement, because the semantic layer, right, since it's taking care of that data governance and it's centralizing your logic, your teams can now really focus on what they're really good at, right? So instead of your analysts trying to go and track down like which one of these 6 revenue definitions should we be using, they can actually focus on the reports and analysis that they need to be doing. And likewise, you know, on the data science side, they can really focus on those machine learning and algorithms, you know, that they are working on as well. On top of that as well, the semantic layer also has a capability for your teams to continue using the tools that they already have in place, right? So it's also enabling your team to keep using those familiar tools that they know and love, right? Since the semantic layer is just sitting in between your data and your machine learning and business intelligence platforms, there's no change required by those teams. All right, and onto our fourth and final benefit that we'll talk about here today, accuracy and reliability. Again, probably some themes that you've been seeing come up over and over again, but they're all really important to hit on once more. So again, that semantic layer, it's taking away that requirement, right, for any kind of analytics engineering knowledge to interact with and use your data. So you can go in, you can query your data, you can use it without actually knowing SQL or how to code, right? So again, it's opening up those doors for your entire organization. And again, centralizing that business logic so that there's one source of truth across your entire organization. And really also what that helps cultivate, again, is that trust in the data, because there's really no point in having all of this data and all of this sophisticated tools and analysis if really you cannot trust your data, right? And of course, there are a number of other benefits that we could also discuss here, you know, maybe a little bit more technical on the side of maybe a little bit more technical, you know, like more related to performance or optimization or something like that. But I think these 4 really highlight the business impact that a semantic layer adds to your business. And with that, that actually now brings us to our real world application. And this is an example where I have personally witnessed the power of the semantic layer. We were working with a client, and more specifically their finance and unit economics teams, to work on allocating variable costs to the unit level to get a more holistic view of how much each unit was truly costing, right? So before, they had mostly just these kind of high level aggregated views of their costs, but they really wanted to know, how much is this one product truly costing me? So for example, to even get a little bit more specific, to kind of help paint this picture a little bit more, if we take vendor freight costs as an example, you know, they had the cost, they know how much they were spending in vendor freight, but they couldn't say how much of that per product they were spending. So that's one of the problems that we were helping them to solve. And when we first came in, without a semantic layer, there were a few pain points. The first of those being iterative. And this isn't a pain point by itself, but I think coupled with, you know, the lengthy process that we'll talk about here next, it became one of their pain points. But so with this iteration, you know, as I'm sure you can imagine, these complex allocations and calculations require a lot of collaboration across the business. We have to bring in people with that expertise, from accounting, from finance, from procurement, all across the board. We need those individuals and those business users to come in and provide that insight into how to make these allocations as accurate as possible. And so again, as you can imagine, very complex process. As you continue building out these allocations, new situations come up and you have to keep adding to them, which then also means it turned into a very lengthy process because, as you need to go back to your data engineering team or whoever owns your data pipeline and request these further upstream changes, that requires a lot of time every time you need this process to change. And, sometimes it was taking 2-3 weeks per request to have them actually come through the data pipeline, right? Since a lot of engineers tend to work in sprint cycles, there is kind of a lengthy process to that. And lastly, another pain point that they were feeling during all of this was that lack of governance. The teams that we were working with were commonly turning to developing their logic in worksheets, which isn't necessarily, by itself a horrible thing, but I know that we've all been there with worksheets. It's so easy to just, make that one keystroke mistake, and it can have impacts down, for your entire data and down the line. Trying to pinpoint where that mistake came from, it takes a lot of time to try and figure out as well. And it's also very much siloed, right? It's not as easy to share out with your organization too, as you're trying to develop this. So those were all some of the main pain points that they felt before the semantic layer. And then once they introduced a semantic layer, all of those essentially went away, right? So if we take this back to those 4 key benefits that we talked about a little bit earlier on, with usability and understandability, they're that agile development, again, so it took away that lengthy process to iterate upon the work and the knowledge that they were trying to incorporate into their data. They could actually develop it quite quickly, and they weren't as reliant on upstream changes. In terms of security and governance, actually, this was a pretty cool thing that I saw them do. As they were actually developing and in the process of developing this allocation methodology, they did not want to open up that whole methodology to the entire company when it was still in progress, right? They didn't want some users going in using that data that they weren't super familiar with or that was still potentially going to change until it was actually in a more stable place. And so they were able to actually enforce some security policies to make sure that their logic that they were building out was not available to everyone until it was actually in a secure, a little bit more of a stable form. In terms of capability, once that logic then was in that more stable form, then they were actually able to share it across the organization. And they actually had several different, business intelligence reporting tools that they were using. And so being able to use it across all of the tools that they had was really key for them as well. They didn't want to develop this logic and then only have it potentially in one tool, right? They were actually able to very easily share this knowledge across the entire organization. And then lastly, with accuracy and reliability, again, kind of similar to what we were just talking about, that logic is not siloed, right? It's not variable across departments. You have that single source of truth. And so when users are actually going to use that data that they were building out, they knew that it was accurate and that they could rely on it. And so this was a bit more of a real world example of how the semantic layer can truly impact your business, right? Across functional roles, across verticals, across the entire organization. And with that, that is everything we have for you today. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions or you're interested in opening up a discussion with us at DOS42 on how to unleash that power of your data, please feel free to visit us at DOS42.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cassidy, for taking the time with us today.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome.
Thanks, Cassidy. Up next, you don't want to miss Jim Dowling, CEO at HopsWorks, talking about the feature store and the semantic layer.